Love you.
Love you too, Dave.
Are we recording?
We'll start in just a second. We are live, but yeah, we're not quite recording yet.
One in the Octane channel too.
Test 1 2 1
good.
2.
All right.
Test 1 2. Awesome.
We got people in here. We got the chat working.
You're a little quiet, Dave.
I'm a little quiet. A little quiet.
Yeah, fix your.
How's that? That better?
There you go.
All right.
Yep, better.
XLRs are weird. All right. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. I got the chat over here. I think we're good. I'm gonna go ahead and start my recording on this side.
Cool. I got mine running.
If y'all want to go ahead and start the record, and then we'll do a sync clap. Let me know when you're both rolling.
I am rolling.
Okay.
We're recording?
Yeah, go ahead. All right. And the clap. 1, 2, 3. Awesome.
Perfect.
Oh, what up, Andy? How you doing there? All right. I think we're ready to go. I'm going to do the regular intro, and Matt will introduce you and just say hello, and I'll do the little spiel, and then we'll go right into it. This is all we're doing today, so
let's do it.
I should mute my phone though. That's probably a good idea. There we go. All right, here we go. What's up, and welcome to another Mograph Mocast. I'm Dave.
And I'm Matt, and joining us today is one of our favorite people in the whole world, Mr. Jules Urbach from Otoy.
Pleasure to be here, guys, as always.
And Mograph is a supplement to our site, mograph.com, which is a motion graphics tutorial site with tutorials, plugins, podcasts, and other Mograph stuff. And on the show, we talk about everything ranging from motion graphics to Cinema 4D, After Effects, plugins, render engines, doing business, doing taxes, being a contractor, or working for the man. You can email us, info@mograph.com. Let us know what you think about the show. Questions, comments, concerns, queries, ideas, topic ideas. Let us know. But today, we're having a special bonus-ode, if you will. Because Joel's here, we're going to talk about Octane 2020 here. While we're
yeah,
I know that a lot of people are getting their hands on the preview, and this is a great time for it. because it's the holidays and everybody's rushing to finish their projects. But as soon as they're done, it's going to be like this weird time where there's sometimes not a lot of stuff to do. And it's a great time to dig in and mess around with new stuff like Octane 2020 and get your hands on that tested out stuff. So
I want to read a tweet that someone said earlier, if I can find it really quick. It was from Brandon Clements. Oh yeah, he said, I've been using Redshift for the greater part of the year and I love it. Then I downloaded Octane 2020 and it's just stupid, fast, and responsive. Such an awesome time for computer graphics. It's like, that's great, you know?
Yeah.
All the different render engines are pushing each other to become faster and better, and I think it's a great time for all of us.
It is. It is. And for Octane 2020 in particular, it was really, one of the headline features was RTX speedups. We had never really brought that into the C4D plugin. RTX is amazing. Like, we did promise, hey, there's going to be cases where it's 2 or 3 times faster, but to our delight, and even NVIDIA was like, texting us like, wait a minute, how are people getting 10 times the speed? And it turns out they're real scenes where there's a lot of overlapping, vegetation or foliage where it can be 7, 8, 10, 15 times. That's compared to Octane 2019.1. So those ray tracing cores really do speed up rendering by a factor of sometimes 10x in these scenes. And it's just great to see that happening. And I've sort of anecdotally, I've seen that C4D scenes in particular seem to have a lot more speed up than we're seeing in other plugins. Like we did it in RTX plugin release for Max and Maya, and it's just not as it may be motion graphics and C4D in particular, the way that it's set up just seems to get more speed ups. But it's been great. So that's been one of the great features that's come out in 2020. Obviously C4D noises. We asked Maxon for a license to those, and they're like, here's, they were great about it. They've been so supportive. So we put that into 2020. Ahmed's been doing great work there. And there's also multi-threading in the material system in Node Editor now.
Yeah.
That was also added to 2019 .15, right? Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. So we do bring back, because 2019.1 is still the stable version, anytime we do something that we can sort of backport to the stable version easily, we do that. So yeah, that made it in there. And also some of the rounded edges improvements from Octane 2020 are also in 2019.15.
And what makes, because I don't quite understand it, what makes RTX so much faster, and what things in particular cause that speed up? I would sort of, it's almost like the difference between CPU and GPU, or more precisely, like when you're doing video encoding or decoding, right? You have specialized hardware on your phone that does video encoding in a special chip and video decoding in a special chip that is 10 times more efficient per watt than doing it on even a GPU or CPU. And ray tracing hardware is the same exact thing. These RT cores are specialized, hardware that's on the NVIDIA GPUs that can handle, a certain part of the rendering pipeline. In other words, tracing rays, shooting rays around, not necessarily doing the lighting and shading, but actually just figuring out where rays hit other objects. Those RT cores do that for you. Previously to those cores being used, you had to write that code on GPU cores. And in terms of the amount of efficiencies that you get, a ray tracing core versus a CUDA core is basically 10 times more power per watt. So even though the GPUs don't have that many ray tracing cores, this, the amount that they do have in there is able to, if you're able to send rendering work to that chip, it'll actually, to that part of the chip, it'll make it significantly faster. And I've actually petitioned NVIDIA to add more ray tracing cores because I think that we can actually speed some of those renders that are seeing 2 or 3x up even more if you had more ray tracing cores on there. And if you don't have RTX or you turn RTX off, then it'll just do Octane the way it's been doing it for 10 years, which is just using the more general purpose graphics cores to do ray tracing. But ray tracing isn't everything. You also have to do shading and lighting and all these other things that are not accelerated by RTX. So there is sort of that's why it's a sliding scale. And it's scene dependent, but we started to see pretty regular patterns where the more instancing you use, the more overlapping triangles you have, the more that those ray tracing cores can actually be used to speed up the whole render. So
Gotcha.
I guess like some of the different tests that I've seen online, right? Some of them are fast, some of them are extremely fast. And so is it like instancing? Is it reflections? What is making some renders faster than others?
Something we can do in order to make sure that we get those increased speeds.
Yeah.
I mean, so heavy use of instancing is definitely a plus. Cool. Anything that has tons of instancing and tons of overlapping geometry is a plus. There's also things you can do that we've actually specifically added in Octane just really to take advantage of RTX. So we added vertex displacement in 2019, knowing that was and the vertex displacement has many benefits, right? It does allow you to do OSL textures, procedurals. There's no UV mapping needed. The only limitation is you have to sort of set a tessellation factor for the geometry. But if that notwithstanding, that is fully accelerated with RTX, whereas the older texture-based displacement, which is completely procedural but in texture space and has some of these voxel, uses sort of voxel-based displacement, that is not going to be accelerated in RTX. So that's why we have those two systems, and gotcha. Vertex displacement full speed. So if you are going to turn RTX on and you want to have, and there's going to be a difference between vertex displacement and texture displacement speed-wise, you want to sort of think about that. I'd also say that if you're thinking about how to optimize your scene for RTX, typically less volumetrics aren't sped up by RTX at all, and anything you can turn into a tri-mesh versus a sphere primitive or a strand primitive, those don't get accelerated by RTX either. So, the more that you have in your scene that's in a triangle mesh that's using vertex displacement over texture displacement, those things will then go into the bucket that you can speed up with RTX cores. That doesn't mean, by the way, that if you throw in volumetrics or hair, that it's going to slow it down to back to the old speed. It just is a spectrum of speed that scales back the more you don't have tri-meshes and things that can be fed to the RT cores.
Okay. And so I guess what was my other question? Oh, I'm sure this has been answered before, but if you turn RTX on and you do have cards that don't have RTX, are you able to mix that? Or
yes.
Okay. That's awesome.
Okay, so they do actually work together.
Yes, certainly they should. And the way that it essentially works is that the non-RTX cards will just be slower. Just like you can mix very fast NVIDIA, CUDA cards, with a ton of CUDA cores or very old, CUDA GPU, and it'll still work. It's just cumulative. The speed would be cumulative, essentially.
And so it would still use the RTX improvements. Or would it just be like you were using regular GTX cards?
It would use the RTX speed up on the cards that have it would actually work.
That's great.
And it would essentially be like if you get 3 times the speed, it's like having 3 of those GPUs with RTX off, and you can still mix that with slower non-RTX cards, and it'll just all be added together. The Octane bench score that you would get with RTX on plus the RTX Octane bench score you get with RTX or non-RTX cards would just be added all together, and it's completely cumulative.
That's awesome.
And Octane's pretty resilient to that kind of mix and matching. We're doing something even more complicated with Octane X, which is completely, we can get into that in a little bit, but that's a complete rewrite of Octane for metal. And that you can also mix with CUDA cards as well. Once that's fully finished, Octane 2020.1 stable and Octane X stable will be completely identical. You can mix those together, or at least over network rendering.
Well, that's nice awesome. Because there's a lot of people, I think, who have like their main machine, and that's the one that gets the big upgrades. That gets the new 2080s and things like that. And then you have a render server sitting somewhere, and it's got the older cars in it, the hand-me-downs, and you start stacking those up. And it's good that you can still use those, because we were talking the other day, we're like, do we have to get like a whole new round of RTX before we
build
can
all RTX machines and stuff?
Yeah, but that's really great.
Being able to use our older cards as well. That's great, yeah.
And so I'm sure that everybody is wanting to hear about the Octane X stuff.
Real quick, real quick before you go there, another big thing that was introduced was Sculptron.
Yes,
I would love to hear. I would love to hear a little bit more about that. I've seen some stuff, and someone had done created a plugin or something in Blender where you were able to kind of mix sculpting stuff, and someone referenced Sculptron as being very similar to that. I'd love to hear a little bit more about it because I only know so little.
Yeah. So I'd announced that we were doing Sculptron, I think, in the fall, at SIGGRAPH in July, and the plan was actually to sort of integrate this into the core of Octane, because I wanted to have tools that were built into the render that could do things like, Vectron sculpting and all these other things. We also had been developing technology internally since doing tests with Facebook, for volumetric video, to be able to sculpt and clean up, point clouds in time. And sort of all that technology ended up being productized. Lena Grandi, who is one of our Evangelos is sort of in charge of Sculptron, and it's a tool that we felt needed to happen because there's not a lot of really good sculpting tools that deal with temporal data or even procedural data. So it's not ZBrush. It's different than some of the other sculpting things out there, and maybe it's a little niche, but when we put it out there only a couple of weeks ago now, there's a lot of demand. We got a lot of downloads, and a lot of people really love it. So we're about to put out the second release for it. It's still alpha next week, and I think that we'll keep it as a standalone tool, but eventually we're going to work it into as a module that could go into Octane, so that in the Octane viewport you can actually do live sculpting, live instancing, placement, and things like that. But ultimately, even as a separate tool, I think people are seeing a lot of utility for it, and there isn't a lot of really good sculpting temporal tools out there, and that's why we sort of built it and put it out there. And I think the response so far has proven that there is sort of that missing piece, that gap. So it's been encouraging, and also Sculptron is all GPU based. So like Octane, which was a 100% GPU rendering system, Sculptron is also completely GPU based as well. So you do get speed ups for doing a lot of complex procedural layers and things like that.
Cool. So, and I haven't opened it at all. Is it similar to ZBrush in the fact that you can actually physically sculpt in it, or is it just for? That's awesome. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm sold.
Yeah. So yeah, and we have a free version that that will keep free, just like Octane free tier, and then we'll have we'll probably have some of the more advanced features limited to people that are on Octane Studio or Enterprise or purchases, so that we still have people that are able to enjoy the tool paying nothing, and then if you're paying a subscription or buying Octane, you'll be able to get the full set of features.
Cool.
That's awesome. Very cool. Very cool. And y'all just introduced a free tier for Daz Studio as well. I saw that.
Yep. Yeah. So our plan, we announced way back in the Octane 4 days that we're going to probably make about half of our plugins eventually free. So we're about a third of the way through. That's our fourth free plugin, and we're just taking it sort of month by month and seeing, because every time we do a free plugin, it's meant to sort of introduce users to the Octane ecosystem, and we're doing it in a sort of a pretty organic way. Obviously with Unity, we're starting with tools that are free themselves, right? So Blender's free, Daz is free, sense. Unity and Unreal's free, but we could do more of those. And we're trying to also figure out. Obviously, we want to kind of make money too, right? So we're trying to see, does this lead users to actually pay for the 2 GPU version, because the free version is only for 1 GPU? And the answer so far has been yes. So I think that we want to. Yeah, so we're going to add more. Daz is definitely not the last plugin in the feature. We're definitely looking at doing some more of those, and I think eventually we might get up to 10 free plugins, and maybe beyond that if this keeps working out pretty well for us.
That's awesome. That's way awesome.
Cool.
Yeah.
So everybody wants to know about Octane X. I keep seeing the comments, so I'll let you talk about that.
Great. It's internally at Otoy, it's been a huge and pretty rewarding project for us because, let's start from the beginning. Basically, our path to getting Octane on the Mac has been so fraught with complications from going back 5 years. When Apple, and it was Apple that announced Octane X for us, which was wonderful. They went up on stage and said, Octane's coming to the Mac Pro, it's coming to Metal. That was a culmination of 5 years of working with the Metal engineers. And initially we announced for Octane 3, we're going to bring Octane to OpenCL. And the only reason we care about anything other than CUDA and NVIDIA was the Mac. It wasn't really to support AMD cards on Windows machines or Linux machines. NVIDIA, frankly, is a great option for those systems. But on the Mac, you don't have NVIDIA cards at all anymore. Just recently, CUDA support for macOS is gone. So there's no, and we kind of saw that coming. I think a lot of people did. So we knew that we had to get some sort of support going. And OpenCL was created by Apple, then canceled by Apple, and then we did an AMD CUDA cross compiler, which I think you guys saw at our SIGGRAPH 2 years ago. Yeah. That was working. It was slow, but it worked. And then we showed it to Apple, and they're like, "Oh, guys, this is only going to run a boot camp. You need to really rewrite this for Metal." And so ultimately, pretty much right around, I guess, 18 months, 2 years ago, we decided, okay, we're going to do this again. And rather than writing a CUDA cross compiler for AMD, we're just going to rebuild Octane in OpenGL Compute, which is a language that's much simpler than CUDA, and use that to build cross compilers for all the different backends. So we can cross compile to Metal, to Vulkan, back to CUDA.
Cool.
And that's how Octane X actually, got going. And I can report that as of right now, we have almost everything in Octane running in GLSL Compute, and it runs absolutely fantastic on AMD cards, Intel integrated graphics on the MacBook Pro, and it all runs in metal. And so feature-wise, we're further along feature-wise than we were with the RTX preview in March of this year. So you can load in almost every single scene. Like I've loaded in full production scenes, and it runs on the Mac on metal. I'd say speed is about 5 or 6 times faster than we had with the AMD cross compiler. We still have probably about a few more months of optimizations before I'd say it's comparable to the CUDA version.
I was going to say, how's the speed in comparison to like the RTX versions or the CUDA versions?
Well, the one thing that right off the bat, you will not get the RTX on speed on any AMD cards. That is a no-go.
Yeah.
You also don't have the you don't have cuDNN. You don't have the tensor cores for AI denoising. So the AI denoiser on the Mac works, but it's actually it's not using specialized hardware. So there's no specialized hardware for RTX or for AI processing. But the AI denoiser on the Mac still cleans up in a second. It's so fast. It's pretty fast anyway. And yeah, I mean RTX on is just not going to happen on Octane X on AMD or Intel chips. But I will say that I think everyone in the graphics chip space, since NVIDIA announced RTX on, is going to probably be working on some form of ray tracing hardware acceleration. Like AMD's announced that the I believe the PlayStation 5, the Xbox, whatever, the new Xbox is going to have ray tracing hardware acceleration. We partnered with Imagination Technologies long before RTX because we believe in ray tracing hardware. And so there are other people that are working on ray tracing hardware acceleration. It may be a couple of years before you see that, but it's not going to be exclusive to NVIDIA. Although NVIDIA, I think, is so far ahead, it's going to be. We'll see how others catch up.
For sure.
So the reason we actually are ready to put out a test build of Octane X. The only thing that we're waiting on is a version of it. Only works in 10.15, by the way. It does not work on 10.14 or 10.13 because we need absolutely the very bleeding edge latest metal drivers for all of this to work. And to that point, there's a couple of things that we've asked Apple to support that we need for a full version of Octane that they're working on, and it's going to be in some, I think it's 10.15.5 or something like that. So once that version of that is out there, we can put out a preview, and that's what we're waiting on. That shouldn't be more than a few months from now, and we could probably, maybe if we wanted to work on putting out a preview for a slightly earlier build, we could, but it would be missing some features like OSL, which is one of the, which is something that it's a huge feature in Octane, and it was a lot of work. Probably out of all the things we had to port over to Metal and the new GLSL compute framework, OSL, the compiler, which we wrote ourselves on CUDA, had to be rewritten, and it was months and months of work. So that's probably one of the most complex pieces in Octane X, but I'm happy to report that also works. So we can run those on an internal build of 10.15, and it's awesome. And we, last month we also got our first version of Octane X full features running on an Intel integrated graphics chip on awesome. Low-end MacBook. It's not super fast, but it works.
Yeah, I mean, but I think that's to be understood. I mean, sometimes you'll be out on like a shoot or out on location or something like that, or at an event, and you've just got to pull out your laptop real quick. It'd be great. Like I know a lot of people enjoy working on their Macs, but not having that NVIDIA support has been tough, so being able to just hop on there, make a quick change, send it back to your farm and just render it there, it's good to go.
Yeah. I think I'm looking at the comments here. I can't see all of them because, but somebody's asking about the iPad version. So the iPad version is in development. I mean, we have 3 GPUs with Octane X that we're looking to support. I mean, the Intel family, the AMD family, and the Apple chip family. Ironically, the most advanced iOS device that we can run on right now is the iPhone, because it's the only one shipping with 813, the very latest chips in the iPhone 11. So we're developing Octane on the iPhone 11 first, and then we're going to work backwards from there to get it on the A12, which is the iPad Pro, and then we can go further and further back. But I will say that our experience with the iPad Pro, the current version that I'm actually using right now, Skype with you guys, is faster than an Intel integrated graphics chip, which we already have working. So my expectation is that you probably will get pretty decent speeds on an iPad Pro on set as well, and it'll be the full version of Octane. Everything should work. The only thing missing really is, of course, all the plugins, right? There's no C4D or, there's no Maya really on the iPad. So it's going to be probably some simplified version of Octane standalone at the very beginning, but that's still kind of useful. And we are going to have an SDK on the for iOS or iPad OS that'll allow you to build integrations and plugins around Octane, including Hydra support, which we think will work pretty nicely on there, which means you can have anything that can have a Hydra viewport like Houdini does now. Maya has that. If you build your iOS app with a hybrid viewport, like you should be able to use Octane for iOS and iPad in your application. And we're going to work with third parties on making that work nicely. We also have interesting things for touch and for sculpting, and even ARKit, all that would work in Octane X on iPad. So I think it's going to be a really interesting tool. And I also know that Apple, I mean, they've been performance per watt in compute cores on the iPad. And I said this before on in previous podcasts we've done together. It's way faster than Intel, but it also, I think, in terms of raise per watt, it's actually, I think, faster potentially than a lot of desktop GPUs, including NVIDIA cards. I mean, obviously, those Apple GPUs don't scale up all the way to what a desktop GPU could do for hundreds of watts, but it's really compelling to sort of see how fast a mobile chip can run Octane and do ray tracing. And we've done like Octane Bench on iPad and iOS, and it was pretty good. I mean, it was in the 30 or 40 Octane Bench range, which is, that was what desktops were 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. Yeah. That's pretty good.
Yeah, Andy just said Sculptron on iPad with an Apple Pencil. That would be cool.
Oh, that would be fun.
That would be cool.
Very cool.
and it'll happen. It'll happen. Yeah. So there's been a lot of discussion around bringing Sculptron to one of the features on the Sculptron roadmap is just to put Octane as a viewport in there, and to get that all running on the iPad, and with the Apple Pencil, obviously, and with having the ability to do 6-DoF sculpting and all this stuff. There's so many cool things you could do. It feels like it's totally fertile ground to do absolutely awesome stuff. And Sculptron definitely has a life on the iPad Pro with Octane integrated in there as well. So yeah, it's super exciting.
Andy wanted to know if you had one of the new Mac Pros to play with now.
Well, I can't say. we ordered our Mac Pros for the office, and obviously we've been working with Apple on just making sure that Octane runs on the Mac Pros and all of that. So I will say that on the 4 GPU Mac Pros, it does scale 4x, which is great. I mean, everything on Octane X, it runs just like it does on the CUDA NVIDIA PC world, including network rendering. We tested network rendering between multiple Mac Pros. And yeah, in terms of having a Mac Pro in the office, we did order 2, so we're excited to get those in our hands. And
is it the 1.5 terabyte?
No, I can't afford that.
I don't think anybody can.
I mean, if I had a house and I mortgaged it, I could, no. I think it's unfair though for people talking about how expensive the Mac Pro is. I mean, 1.5 terabytes of RAM is going to be $25,000 on a PC as well. So if you're looking at a $50,000 cost, you're going to spend an extra $25K on a PC with 1.5 terabytes. It's not really a Mac specific thing. So.
I totally agree.
Is the preview available? What other plugins is the preview available on right now? Is it everything? I know like Cinema 4D just came out. Are there certain ones that's not available on yet?
For Octane 2020 or for
2020? 2020. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
So C40 came out. I think Houdini just came out. I think we're working on Max and Maya. Rhino came out. Daz came out. So yeah, I mean, we should have all the plugins by the end of this month. Almost all the plugins should have at least a 2020 preview version. I think Lightwave is coming shortly. They should all be there. And I know Unity and Unreal are just about to hit 2020 as well. Yeah, so I would say that it's a safe bet to say that almost all the plugins by the end of December should at least have a 2020 XB1 or XB2 build out in users' hands. And then we're going to hit RC1. We've got about 3 or 4 features we're adding. We need to get dirt and rounded edges working in RTX on mode. We're adding, we need to add, essentially geometry attributes, which we added in 2018 for vertex data. In 2020, you have that now for spheres, and we're going to add strand primitives as well. So all primitive types will actually have the equivalent of vertex attributes, and that's in progress now. Once we hit that, I think that we'll be pretty close to feature complete and roll out RC1 hopefully early next year. And the idea is that by March we're at stable.
Awesome.
For 2020.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's so much stuff in 2020.
Yeah,
random walk, SSS, the Maxon noises, ACES support. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's one of the things right now is like
split diopter camera. That's so cool.
A lot of people are just trying to skip as much post work as possible and make it look as final as possible in the viewport. And there's a lot more tools for that. I love the optical stuff and the optical vignetting. Also the sky model. There's the new sky model as well. What are the differences with the new sky model?
So the Hosek Sky is based on a paper for a more advanced sky model than we've had in previous versions, and so we did get some requests to add it. And at this point, I mean, we have our own ideas for features, like, Spectron has polarization and fluorescence material in progress. But whenever we get a lot of user requests, like ASUS was one of the top ones, we're like, we have to prioritize that. Like every time that there's more than 10 top users asking for something, that goes to the top of the to-do list. So, and the Hosek Sky did get a lot of requests. Like, when we get this specific sky model, and like, okay, we'll do that, and we'll try to make it even better. And since Octane Spectral, we'll see if we can put in some really cool features in there. So the Hosek Sky it's different. I mean, if you go through the 4 different sky models, I think Hosek is the most realistic. But it doesn't have like.
Go ahead. No, I'm just excited about this.
Yeah, it doesn't have the Sheeta space mode, that the Sheeta Sky has. But that's why we have different options. I mean, different sky models make sense in different scenarios. But there is, if you look at the images we put out with 2020, and you just look at that interior, the Hosek Sky model has nicer yellows at sunset, and golden hour looks a little bit better. So we wanted to have that in there. It's fascinating. We actually model a lot of these features in OSL, and then we just bake that into Octane, because the OSL system in Octane is so powerful. You can create new sky systems, new camera systems. It's all there. And so sometimes we have internal developers using OSL just the way any Octane user could. And a lot of people are like, well, these are, I keep saying, oh, you can write this in OSL. And a lot of users say, well, can we just get this built in Octane? So that's why we ended up. And another thing that came out with 2020, but also is available all the way back to 2018, is you now have in LiveDB tons and tons of third-party OSL shaders. Utility shaders. A lot of people say, oh, the utility shaders in Octane are minimal. Well, that's because we have OSL. You can write anything you want. You can write state shaders. You can do, all these things in there, ray switches, all that. So we just threw that into LiveDB, and that way we could just keep adding these features, even retroactively to previous Octane builds. And it's a pretty robust library. I will say that thanks to Arnold's robust support of OSL, and the team there doing some, really putting out some amazing shaders. We just, some of those, a lot of the shaders that are in our LiveDB came from, the Arnold's guys and the community there. And so big shout out to those guys for just making OSL even more useful to all of us. And obviously a lot of renderers are now adding OSL too. So it's great. It feels like it's a really great utility to expand upon.
What about the hair material? The new hair material.
So the hair material is, so we have new random walk for skin specifically, because that's, that was something that really made a big difference. Like DAZ users, I mean, most DAZ users are rendering human skin, and they went crazy when we put out 2020 with the random walk. And the hair shader is sort of a reflection of that for strands and hair. And it's basically, I mean, I think a lot of, it's based on the Disney paper. I think a lot of the advanced hair shaders used in production are all similar to the Disney, the paper that was put out. And so Octane's is based on that. We, of course, did our best to make it work with, spectral rendering in Octane and make it fast. And then we did get immediate feedback after we put out 2020. Can we add randomization for melanin and some other features? So all that's being put in there. It's great to get feedback. That's why we put out these test releases and give ourselves, a month or two before we go to release candidate and stable. But yeah, it's awesome. It's a huge improvement over trying to do hair with the universal material we had before, because obviously this particular hair BRDF is designed for, to look absolutely fantastic for hair and make it artist friendly as well.
What about the AI upsampler? I haven't had a chance to play with that yet.
Yeah, so it came out of the same sort of research that we were spearheading for just AI denoising and other AI effects. We did although we haven't released this in Octane, we do have a non-realistic rendering filter in AI and stuff. But the AI upsampler felt like it was an important feature to try to squeeze in there, and it does. In a lot of scenes, you can just render it at quarter res, and it'll upsample perfectly. And especially, I mean, it doesn't work great if you're doing postage stamp size renders, for example. But if you're doing something at 2K and want to blow it up to 4K or 8K. AI upsampler could be really useful for that, and it was specifically for large format renders where you're looking at 14K renders. You may not need to render at that resolution. You can render it at quarter res or half res and essentially get the same results. And every single one of our SIGGRAPH video walls has been using the AI upsampler as a separate utility. So it's like if it works well for us, and we had artists that would submit samples in both super high res and quarter res, and we were just realizing, well, wait a second, the upsample quarter res one is identical to the full render, so it's good enough. And I think for large renders, the AI upsampler is excellent. It's not a panacea for necessarily every single use case for smaller render buffer sizes, but for large ones, it's fantastic. And we use we internally were using it for 2 years now, so we figured, okay, it's time to ship this in Octane and let everyone have the same tool.
Now, some of the other bullet points that I saw earlier when I was looking, there was some deep digging that I was doing, and the particle color and float attributes, is that meaning that it can take something from like Houdini, the color and float from Houdini, and interpret that?
Yeah.
Do I have that right?
Yes. So we've actually, I mean, it was one of the weak spots in Octane for years, and we've heard about this, and because I'm not a Houdini user myself, I mean, I'm actually, most of my time is working on the core of Octane and standalone. I've spent a little bit of time in each of the plugins, but we had a lot of feedback from our Houdini users that were saying, well, you guys are missing, vertex attributes, you guys are, and just in the vertices, right, geometry, as well as spheres and hair and those and the like. So we addressed that as quickly as we could after Octane 4 with 2018, which did have the vertex attribute support for meshes, but we were still missing, and this is something Houdini users were complaining about with 2018 and 2019, we're missing the same attribute support, the equivalent of vertex attribute support for spheres, for particles, and for hair. So the 2020 addresses all of that, and you now have attribute support in all primitive types, just like you've previously had for for meshes and triangles, and that's huge for Houdini users, but also I think Ahmed's going to make good use of that as well for greater efficiencies in the C4D plugin. And I think he's done a lot of crazy workarounds in the past to get around us not having this in the core, but now if it's in the core, we can simplify and make things work better.
And the new dirt shader, what is different now about the dirt shader in comparison to before?
So the dirt shader before was you didn't have as much granular control. A lot of users were asking for directional dirt, where you can have dirt actually, dirt is really just ambient occlusion rays that you shoot out from a point.
Right.
And so you can now control sort of how those rays get sprayed out. You can put them in a funnel. You can control, you can even send, sort of procedural textures into how that funnel is shaped. So you can do a lot more complex dirt effects, and it's pretty neat. So you can even link sort of multiple dirt shaders together to do different channels, like have red dirt and green dirt, all that stuff can be handled in interesting ways. And so, you just have a lot of control over the spread function and the shape of the sampling for how dirt works. And we, you can also now include other objects in the dirt shader calculations, which wasn't possible before. Similar things can be done with in more accurate rounded edges shader that we added in 2019 and 2020. I think it's a massive improvement over the dirt shader before. And again, it was one of those features where we were seeing the feature requests come in, and they're like, can we get more control of the dirt system? So we added that, and perfected it, I think, in 2020. And it's fairly comprehensive. I don't think there's anything really missing from it. When we put it out there and users were testing it, it seems like we sort of got everything that you'd want to have in the dirt system in that very first 2020 release. So we're pretty happy with it. It seems like users are too.
Cool. Well, I know there's a bunch of questions that we have in here. I'm trying to take down as many as possible. If you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. I think one of the questions too, I know since you're kind of waiting for Apple to do a couple things for Octane X, I guess the question is, when is there going to be a preview of that or something expected?
So I would say early next year, and I think we're targeting, just to be frank, a stable release of Octane X around the same time as Octane 2020, so March, April, something like that. And our expectation is we'll have a preview, systems like that. I mean, it's not completely in our hands because we need Apple to sort of help us with, with these driver updates. But I would say, in the next couple of months, we'll start to have, something close to a release candidate, and a stable release is still on target for Q1. And we were hoping to have a preview version out in December, but it just the drivers aren't there. One thing we might do though is we might have a bunch of, I want to put out tons of videos and show exactly how it's working, because I think some people just need like proof of life. Even I did. It was really weird until we had everything working on Metal. There wasn't much working. It was just like, he had ambient occlusion working. All of a sudden, everything started to work. PMC, path tracing, every single scene could load. So I think we're going to show that as soon as possible, and as quickly as we can get to an XB1, an RC1, and then get to stable by the end of Q1, late March. So
cool.
That's the plan. A couple of notes about Octane X. There is going to be a coupon code. So if you buy a new Mac Pro, you'll be able to get, just for the Mac, you'll be able to get a free 1-year Octane Enterprise with all plugins for your Mac Pro.
Wow.
And I don't know if this was not public, but you'll also be able to keep the the slave rendering system. So even if you don't upgrade or continue to pay maintenance on the enterprise thing, you can still use this render slave perpetually with the latest, with that version of Octane X. So that's pretty cool. I think that's a great, I think that there's a lot of, a lot of Mac users have been waiting a while to get Octane on the Mac, and it's something that we felt this is a good thing to do. Just like the free version of Octane, like let's see if that sort of boosters the needle and gets people to sort of look at the Metal ecosystem and Octane on the Mac again, because I know there's been a lot of people that have sort of shifted away from that, and I'm a Mac user myself. And at the very least, if you can still mix that with the PC version of Octane, so I think it'll be pretty cool.
I was gonna say, is headless rendering coming in Octane X?
Yes. So headless rendering, and there's probably a little bit of I didn't get even into the Vulkan version of Octane, which is also another, whole other, interesting tangent. But yeah, the headless rendering feature that we actually initially planned for 2019, it really was, again, mostly for the Mac, because most PCs have the ability to have an NVIDIA card. Even laptops have pretty high-end NVIDIA chips in there. So it's not like it's a desperate need, and if you have an NVIDIA chip, you don't really need headless rendering. But on the Mac, it's different. So headless rendering will be in Octane X. It'll be in the final release, and it uses Metal, so it can run on Intel and graphics or AMD, and you can then use you can have no rendering being done on the local machine. It'll just do post-processing, but it'll basically use the network rendering feature in Octane to do all of the rendering on the network GPUs. So there are cases where you may actually want that, even if the Intel integrated graphics chip, let's say, or internal AMD chip on a MacBook Pro could run a scene. It might just slow things down to run it on there. You may just want to have a much faster viewport rendering over the headless rendering system on crazy RTX hardware, for example. It'll also work on the iPad. So the headless rendering feature just is designed to use the GLSL framework that we built for Octane X. And on the PC and Linux side, we could do headless rendering as well using Vulkan. But the problem that we ran into, and I'll just be sort of transparent about where we're at with the Vulkan version of Octane, it works on NVIDIA. It does not compile on AMD yet. And even on NVIDIA, the Vulkan drivers are Vulkan's just not that mature. It's just not as far along as CUDA is, or even frankly Metal. So even though the exact same Intel and AMD GPUs can run Vulkan and Metal, Apple's Metal drivers are way more robust. And we can't, we're having, we can run Octane, let's say the Vulkan version of Octane built from the Octane X code base on AMD and Windows machines, but it's full of problems. And to be frank, even the NVIDIA version, which we can now run on Vulkan as well as CUDA, just isn't as stable. And that's because Vulkan drivers are just very new. There's just a lot of features we've taken for granted in CUDA that aren't in Vulkan yet. Vulkan's been used primarily to create games. It's not like CUDA, which was designed from the ground up to be for advanced applications like Octane. And even on the Metal side, I think Metal prior to this very latest version of Metal going into 10.15 wouldn't have been, it just wouldn't have been possible to have Octane itself with all the features that we have in CUDA running on Metal until this latest version of Metal. So we need Vulkan drivers from NVIDIA and Intel and AMD to sort of catch up to that, to release a Octane version on Vulkan, and then that would also allow us to do headless rendering as well.
Gotcha.
On those platforms.
Glider LP has two questions. One is any plans for additive material blending, and the other question is about Sculptron light primitives in Cinema 4D.
Yeah, so I'll start with the first question. Is additive materials, and the only reason we sort of didn't really throw that into the mix is that they aren't completely unbiased. Octane is unbiased render, obviously. So we don't want to create anything that's not energy conserving, but we could create effects that are similar to that. And we are looking at doing something like that. Like the composite material that we added in 2019, we could add a pin that says make this composite material additive and come up with a way that's still energy conserving, but it still maybe adds the emission channels or emission pieces together, things like that. So that is on the roadmap of something to explore, because obviously at the end of the day, being unbiased and physically correct energy conservation, you can have a tuned material in Octane and break all that anyway, right? And make it all, look not photorealistic. So we want to provide more artistic tools. We are looking at that. It's a great question. So I think it'll happen. We'll probably do a pass at making something along those lines happen in the 2020.2 release cycle. Same thing with nested dielectric, which is another 2020.2 feature we're focused on. As far as Sculptron primitives, that's really something that each plugin sort of has to do something with, right? It's essentially in the core of Octane now, you can have quads, you can have spheres that are really efficient. Like those basically are, I'm not going to call them biased lights, but they get sampled completely differently than having a mesh primitive that's a sphere mesh or a quad mesh. They're much less noisy. And so just like we did with scattering depth being set to 1 and other things we did in 2018 to really give you much faster speeds for volumetric rendering that were similar to biased rendering methods, but still kept Octane's unbiased quality, we're doing that. That's what the Spectron primitives are for. There's never been anything in Octane that makes any distinction between any of the different mesh light emitters. This is the first time, that's why Spectron was created, that allows developers, I mean, we're probably going to have some sample built-in Spectron lights, like cones and things like that that can help with that. But it's going to definitely make a big difference with particles and area lights. And so I think that it probably, in 2020.1 stable in the various plugins, I think you'll start to see support for that. I know Ahmed's already working on quad light support and sphere light support. And they essentially resolve noise about 4 times faster for direct light bounces than just normal mesh light emitters. And I think if you did this in Arnold or Redshift and you tried to do the same thing with mesh lights versus the built-in light primitives, you'd see the same sort of delta. So that's why it was important for us to add it in Octane and to make it work in a way that didn't break fundamentally Octane simplicity. And of course, this energy conserving nature and spectrally correct nature of the renders you get. So I'm pretty happy with that, and I think it'll definitely make significant speed boosts, just like AI Light did, and of course other things we've added over the years on the shading side. And RTX, of course, can accelerate tracing, but it doesn't accelerate shading. So things like Spectron light primitives is our approach to solving speed issues on the shading side and improving that even further.
Cool.
Now I got a couple questions from Tokyo Megaplex, and he always asks stuff that's over my head. So I'm going to try my best. He says, have you looked into gradient domain path tracing or any other cool, more cutting edge ray tracing techniques for Octane?
Yes, the answer is always. Every single research paper that comes out, we've got a team that's essentially the Brigade team is always doing advanced R&D work on that goes into future versions of Octane. And yes, we have looked at that. We've also looked at totally revamping the caustic system, and Corona had great caustics. They just added, there's papers on all of that stuff. So there's a huge amount of work that we're going to be doing on just speeding up the shading pipeline. I mean, I think NVIDIA has done everything that's necessary on the tracing part of rendering with RTX. So what's left in terms of improving speed is really going to come from shading optimizations. And that work is going to go just into Octane transparently. I mean, ultimately, it should just render faster and faster as we add some more, some of these optimizations and improvements. But there is another thing that we're working on, which we announced along with Sculptron at SIGGRAPH, which is Brigade RTX mode. So every without breaking, I mean, there's only so far that we want to take speeding up the shading pipeline before we start to get into something that would affect the quality of Octane. However, there's a huge appetite. If you look at Blender, right, they have EV, Redshift's working on Redshift RT, V-Ray has whatever, Ledvari. I'm saying it wrong. That's Dr. Doom's like home lab, but it's like it's not something like that, which is a real-time thing. So Brigade has always, kind of existed as an internal project that is meant to focus on real time, and we've actually embedded pieces of Brigade in Octane since version 4, like the entire super fast scene graph that makes loading and moving objects super fast has been in Octane 4, but the shading part of Brigade we kept outside of Octane. We just didn't, we didn't know where to put it. However, with RTX, there is a reason for us to revisit that, and that is that if we basically have, improved Brigade's quality and sort of embed that in Octane and sort of have it as a separate kernel, like real-time preview mode instead of PMC or path tracing or direct lighting or info, and you just want to have that, and yes, the quality maybe goes down somewhat, it's not spectrally rendered, we think we can have a version that allows you to basically have the viewport still be path traced, but have it work live with no noise, fully dynamically. And that's something that we want to embed into Octane this year. And that's what Brigade's, Brigade is going to have sort of a second life, I guess, inside of Octane 2020. And also as a completely separate application like Sculptron, where if you want to export your Octane scene or do something with Unity or Unreal, we actually have a version of the Brigade kernel running on RTX with physics and soft body dynamics so that you can kind of just export your scenes and actually do dynamic things with them in AR or VR, which is cool, or in game engines. And Brigade with RTX is designed to really simplify the shading and optimize it as much as possible, still use all of the Octane materials, including OSL, things like that, but just give you much faster real-time feedback on the viewport. And in the case of in certain areas, you can also bake some of the Octane effects and some of the things that Octane does into faster versions that could run in the Brigade RTX mode. And that's going to be actually something that will be working and built into Octane itself across all plugins, but also as a separate module that you can use to power live games and VR and AR experiences, even on iPhone and iPad.
Wow.
Cool. Okay, the next one from Tokyo Megaplex. Also, would it be possible, like with automatic parameter control for MLT, to mix PMC with path tracing intelligently so that you can get things like nice caustics where you have them without slowing everything down?
Yes.
I understand some of those words.
I know.
Yeah. So the work that I was mentioning about us looking into better caustics is exactly that. Like we want to basically add much better PMC caustic speeds to path tracing mode. I mean, that essentially is heavy work that we're heavily invested in doing, and it's possible. So we're actively working on that. The answer to that is yes, and it's in the the R&D work for that is being done now, and I think I'm optimistic that it's something we should be able to pull off in the next year or so, maybe sooner, hopefully not later.
And a couple of people have been asking about an update on render tokens.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So Render has had a pretty great year. I mean, we're actually on the tech level. I think we're completely done with everything in phase 3. We have tons of GPUs in the network. There's one last piece really, which is going to complete sort of everything that we had mapped out for Render, sort of the more interesting blockchain IP things in phase 4, which is we need to have the tokens actually on a platform where you can convert the tokens to money, so that you can actually get paid for your renders, and we're actually pretty close to getting that out there, hopefully this year. And I think at that point, once that's in place, then what we'll do is we'll have essentially Orc phased out and replaced with Render. And is already inside of Render, everything in Orc is there. We're also going to have some interesting things where you can still have tiers of Render jobs that are done on the public cloud with full NPA security and everything else if you so choose. They may be more expensive, but we're working on adding that, and that's something that we expect will work on all the things that Orc works on now, which includes Amazon and Google and Azure and those and the like. But frankly, there's customers that come to us that are trying to they just go and rent AWS instances themselves, and there's only we can only get a few hundred GPUs, and there's just not enough. There's not enough to support a user base the size of Octane, much less all the other crazy things we'd be doing if we really were to push the service more. So Render exists to provide scale that we've never had before. I think it's so important that we provide that. I'm excited to see that happen. And the other thing that I've sort of come to realize is that the one thing that we don't have just yet in Render is that security level that you do get with MPA certification for Amazon and Azure. But we are part of MESA, which is the body that essentially Google and Azure joined to get their certification for doing studio work. And we'll let, if you have a giant render farm and this is what you want to be doing as a business, we can help you get MESA certified so you can start to take over the studio jobs, even on the Render network. But as I said before, one of our surveys, user surveys, 70% of users don't really care about, the absolute worst case scenario. I mean, if your data is end-to-end encrypted, and you have to worry about maybe an adversarial person on a GPU sort of pulling data from GPU memory, which is hard to do. Most users are like, well, we'd rather just have cheaper renders and not worry about that. And frankly, I think that is true because there's a lot of render farms, third-party render farms, where user files are just stored on the desktop, and then somebody's got it, and they're not protected at all. Mm-hmm. And yet there's a thriving business around small third-party render services that don't have great security, probably less security than what Render is going to be doing headlessly on any untrusted node. And then, separately from Render, we also want to support farms better. So PixelPlow, I mean, you guys are the reason why we have PixelPlow support as of now.
I've used it many a time since.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we, I think, and I know as Ty was asking about support for other plugins. So we're going to, once Octane 2020 is done, we are going to support C4D plugins on PixelPlow and potentially a couple of other farms as well. It's just a lot of work to support the plugin system ecosystem, and Ty's been awesome. PixelPlow is awesome. So we'll have that, and then for anything other than C4D, you can still use Orbex exporting. But there's also a lot of work that we're doing, frankly, to get Orbex exports to be even more compact and also export faster. So that works, going to be done in tandem. Mm-hmm. But I think that if you want to use your C4D files in PixelPlow with Octane 2020. We're going to make that happen once 2020 is stable.
That's cool. That's awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Oh, one other thing about Render is when we finish the metal port, you'll be able to run Render jobs on your Mac, your MacBook, and your iPad. And
awesome. Just set my iPad Pro to the side and start making money on Render, right?
There you go.
Yeah. And I don't think people know this, but the 1 terabyte iPad Pro has 6 gigabytes of VRAM. Did not know that. It's not perfect. I think it's like kind of split in 2 tranches. So you have to do something special to get each of the 3 gigabytes sort of linked together. But 6 gigs of VRAM is actually pretty good.
Yeah.
for a lot of jobs. And that's a limiting factor. I mean, ultimately, other than speed, it's just video memory. Obviously, out of core doesn't even matter on the iPad because it's unified memory. But that 6 gigs can get you pretty far. And we can also compress textures on the iPad much more than we can on the PC side. So we can get 8-to-1 texture compression in hardware, which is trivial. On the iPad, we can do 100-to-1, 90-to-1.
Wow.
And the one person that like called me out on that was asking, how are you doing this? Was John Carmack, who's friend of the company, and he actually stopped by Otoy a week or two ago. But yeah, there's much different hardware on the iPad that's been designed for mobile games, right? You can have much, ASCC texture compression on the iPad is much greater than BC1, which is what we're using on the PC. So you're just going to be able to squeeze a lot more textures onto the iPad with texture compression than you in the same 1 gigabyte or 6 gigs of VRAM than you can on the PC. So that's exciting.
Is that only for the iPad, or will that be okay?
It'll never be on desktop GPUs. And the reason I know this is I've been asking NVIDIA for years to say, can you guys add this? And they're like, no, it's like a really big deal to add this kind of mobile texture compression on a desktop GPU because it's so expensive. It takes up a lot of space. Mobile devices need it, and they just don't want to put it on the desktop GPU. So sadly, no, there's no there's no roadmap for that, at least on the NVIDIA side, as far as I know. But it's still not bad to have 10x texture compression or 8x texture compression on on the PC. And of course, you do have things like out of core on the PC and NVLink, which we fully support, which ameliorates some of that not being able to have that sort of advanced texture compression.
For sure.
Something that we haven't had a chance to talk about on the show yet. We'll probably talk, of course, a lot more about it next week. But Joel asks, what are your thoughts on the Maxon Red Giant merger?
I mean, I think it's cool. We've worked with the Red Giant guys in the past. I think it's great. I mean, I think Maxon's a great company. Let me, and by the way, I mean, just to sort of, explain sort of how we got the C4D noises, I just, called up Dave and I said, dude, can we get the C4D noises? He's like, absolutely. Like they're a great company. So I think that anything that sort of they take over, and that includes Redshift as well as Red Giant, is going to have a very bright future. I believe in them. I mean, obviously for us, we're just we're incredibly indebted to the Maxon ecosystem, and I think that it's going to be great, and it's interesting. So I'm curious to see how it sort of all fits together. I mean, obviously Red Giant is more of an After Effects in the After Effects ecosystem, but I can totally see where these things could all sort of converge as well. So I think it's great for users. I mean, for sure.
and Cinema 4D by Maxon says, we love you too, Jules. So I want to keep the chat open for more questions if there are any. We've covered an awful lot. I guess if there's any other little things, maybe somewhere along the lines of stuff that was already in 2019 that has been improved in 2020, like Cryptomat, things like that. Are there any? What are the differences? What are some of the improvements in those areas? Maybe if there's anything we haven't covered, I don't know. We might have covered everything.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much, honestly, and there's also 2019.2, which never made it to a C4D plugin. And the story behind that is kind of simple. Like we were using Vulkan to get the RTX speed up in 2019.2, and we were ready to put that out there really shortly after SIGGRAPH. And the Vulkan drivers again were causing huge issues on Windows. And NVIDIA and us looked at this and we're like, oh, there's no way for either of us to fix this. This is a Windows issue. Microsoft needs to help us. So that's when we decided, okay, we have to scrap 2019.2 development so that we can rebuild RTX in Optic 7, which is a brand new API that NVIDIA only put out, 3 weeks before we released Octane 2020. And that's why some of the features from 2019.2 only appeared in 2020 for the first time in the C4D plugin that just came out. So it's sort of a grading. I mean, there are always things that we're improving. I think for the most part, everything speed-wise that we've improved from 2018 to 2019 to 2020, we're always working on getting like another 10% speed here and there, 50% speed. And, even with RTX off, I think 2020 is just, I believe, in a lot of cases, like 10 or 15% faster than 2019.1 was. And there's still more work to be done there. But yeah, there's a ton of little things. The big features are, of course, all in the release post, and you can look through all of those. There is work that we're doing around Vectron, which is interesting. So you can do Vectron volumes now, which is pretty cool. And we also have volume displacement, which I think is pretty neat as well. So there's a lot of those things have sort of been have been improved a lot behind the scenes. AI denoiser, of course, had a significant speed boost, quality boost with 2019 for volumetrics. We're also, for 2020, doing another pass, retraining the entire data set with brand new scenes, including on top of the old one. So that should improve the quality of the AI denoiser by 2020 final. And yeah, I mean, there's off the top of my head, I think we've covered a lot of the new features that are in this update.
Casey was asking about, I know there's an interest form on the Render Token website. Are you still taking beta applicants, or is that kind of on hold right now, or?
Oh no, we definitely want to have more beta testers, and if you want to join, please just shoot us an email or go to the website. We'll happily add you on there. I think it'll be kind of once we put out the non-beta client, which I think we're there from a technical perspective. I think we're just waiting to have, the platform where you can exchange the render token for fiat essentially done. But after that, it'll just be, it'll be available to anyone that wants to join, and we'll, we actually do encourage users now that want to be part of the beta to sign up. We get inquiries all the time. We add people all the time, so it shouldn't be a complicated process. And just for those who haven't used the render token client, the way it works is it's like SETI at home. It's like a little system tray app. You just turn it on, and it just, in the background, it'll just run jobs, and you can see a little bar that's showing you what you're doing. The other thing that we're probably going to throw in there,
like my nice hash miner that just keeps on going. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that's a no-brainer, even though it makes a lot less money than Render in terms of payout for users, is you can certainly run an Ethereum mining thing in the background if there's no Render job. So you're always, if you're going to turn this thing on, at least you're making something, right, even if your queue of Render jobs isn't being filled. But I think Ethereum has actually been pretty low. So Render being pegged essentially to what the cost is on Amazon and the public cloud pays out way more. So even one job in 1 hour is going to pay you more than running days of Ethereum mining on the same GPU. But if for whatever reason it's fine.
If you're so is the Render, if I'm sending stuff to Orc, is that going out to Render? Or how are people submitting jobs? That's what I'm curious about.
So there's a whole separate website. Orc is actually its own orc.otoy.com website. Render is almost a reskin of Orc on a totally different site with a totally different back end. They'll be merged at some point when we actually are when Render's out of beta. But right now, Render is a different site, so you can submit the same data, but it'll go to a different bucket. And it'll go through the Render network versus the Orc, Amazon, private network that we have with the cloud providers. But it works exactly the same. But it is sort of forked right now. And what we'll do is once Render is fully out of beta and fully working, we'll just take the Orc. We'll probably deprecate Orc completely and just make it so that if you want to have jobs that run on the public cloud, like Orc does now, it'll just be a button in Render and say, I want this to run on AWS, Google, Azure, or something with MTA certification, this kind of security level. It'll cost more. Cool. It'll there may be a limited amount of it, so you may actually have to wait longer to get your renders out of there. But that's how it's going to essentially be merged together. And it won't be long, I think, after Render's out of beta where when Orc sort of gets blended in there. But right now they're separate. So sending a job to Orc is not the same as Render in terms of where the data is stored. We just do that for security reasons. Like, if you send something to Orc, it's safe, secure. It's not running on some third party Render node that we haven't validated. Render is the opposite. It's all essentially untrusted nodes with security, with end-to-end encryption. But those things will be merged together, and we'll just have a flag in Render that says if you want to run this with this level of security and protection, it'll go to AWS, Google. You can even select which one you want at the end of the day with the interface we're building on Render, and then Orc will be subsumed with within the Render interface.
That's super cool.
Webpage. Yeah,
that's super cool.
Mac Daffy asks, how did you improve the volumetric denoiser?
Better training. So, AI, everything AI based in general is all about how well you train the system. So we ended up feeding the AI denoiser a lot more data than the old pre-2019 volumetric denoiser was using. And there's a lot of stuff. Octane's AI denoiser, we wrote that from scratch. We're not using the optics or the Intel denoiser. It's built for Octane, and there's a ton of stuff going on behind the scenes where we're spitting out all this data. Like, a lot of what Octane's doing internally is fed to the AI denoiser system, so it knows as a sense as to what's happening on the shading level. And we didn't really do anything. We didn't really do much work on the very first AI denoiser implementation. It's a totally separate denoiser than all the other denoising pieces that are in Octane. And with 2019 and now 2020. We just had more time to work on that and feed it more data, and I think from a qualitative perspective, you're seeing about 3 times the performance with the new AI denoiser versus the old one, and that came from better training data and retraining the AI denoiser on that better training data, and then putting that back out into the production build.
Cool.
I know that people ask a lot about temporal denoising. We are working on that.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, so we are working on that. It's like we built a couple of versions of it, and it's like it's okay. So we want to see if we can get it to be even better. I think some of the things we found is that there's still improvements to be made in this, sort of the single frame denoising piece first, that we want to finish up and then go back to the temporal denoiser once the still denoiser is actually improved. And we think we can get even more improvements out of that. And there's also other things as well. We want to sort of finish the 2020 feature set. I mean, we added a lot of crazy stuff even in 2019, like layer materials, Spectron. We have Spectron lights now and everything like that. So I think once all these features are kind of stable, we'll revisit both this, the still image denoiser in 2020.2, and then also take another stab at temporal denoising.
Awesome.
Wow,
I'm looking forward to that.
We covered a lot.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
But I think that the question, of course, without any spoilers, the question that's on everybody's mind was, how was the Star Wars premiere?
Yeah.
Oh my God. It was incredible. I mean, from an experiential level, it was mind-blowing. J.J. Abrams is an Octane user. I've known him for 14 years since I started Otoy. So he's been a friend of the company and a friend of mine. And so I'm not ashamed to say I begged him for a +1 and a ticket, and he obliged, and he gave me amazing seats.
Oh, that's awesome.
I love the movie, obviously. I mean, I like the sequel trilogy a lot. I love Rey, and it's really her story. So I'm not going to spoil anything. I know a lot more people haven't seen it yet, but the experience itself was amazing. Like, I saw Ian McDiarmid who plays Emperor Palpatine, and Anthony Daniels who plays C-3PO, and I mean, it was just an amazing experience. And the way that they did it, I think they do this for all the sequels, Disney Star Wars movies. They take over Hollywood Boulevard, and you have the Mad Chinese Theater where Star Wars premiered, right, which is where we saw it. The El Capitan, which is owned by Disney, the Dolby Theater, and they just allow you to go in each of those 3 theaters, and it was just an incredible experience.
Oh man.
And yeah, I also love The Mandalorian, by the way. So it's not just not just a Star Wars movie fan. I think it's fantastic. It's awesome. There's a lot of advanced stuff they do on The Mandalorian, by the way, using real time LED lights and everything to do previs in real time, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
So I think the future of real time and offline render are going to definitely be merging. And guys like Jon Favreau just have a really a good sense of how that's going and are leveraging that today, which is really cool.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah, Kevin Rupp says this is the way.
Yeah. I know some. You haven't seen episode 7 of The Mandalorian.
I haven't seen 7 yet.
All right. We won't. I won't. It's such a great show. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, no spoilers. I got about halfway through it last night, but it was really late, and I fell asleep at the end, so I got to go finish.
No spoilers. I've spoken.
Yeah. Oh man, I think that's it. Unless anyone has anything else, I think we're gonna wrap it up. That was really great. We're glad you took the time during the holidays here to come and hang out with us. And are you going to?
Jules, as always, we totally appreciate it.
Yeah.
Every time you come on,
always.
It's great to hear from you and from the company about like the plans and what you've got and all the new features and stuff, because sometimes a new update or something, you never really get a chance to like dig into everything, and so you kind of just you never really know what's there. But it's great having you on talking about all the different features so that we can kind of get a little bit more pumped about it.
Thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to come on. It's always a pleasure. I love being on your guys' show, and anytime, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right, we're going to wrap it up. Hopefully we'll see you at NAB this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Of course, absolutely. Cool. We'll be there.
Awesome.
We'll be there.
All right. Make sure you follow Jules on the interwebs. Where can people find you on like Twitter, Instagram, all that fun kind of stuff?
Well, on Twitter at Otoy. I share the Otoy Twitter account with a couple of others, but it's mostly me. And on Instagram, just Jules Urbach, Jules.Urbach.
And of course on Facebook.
And of course on Facebook.
Yeah.
Yeah, Facebook. I mean, there's 35,000 Octane users in our group.
Yeah.
It's great. I try to respond to every single one of them. So I think, Facebook's a great resource.
You do a good job at that too. I see you in there all the time.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
Yeah, even on our Slack too. Like anyone asks a question, you're like, boom, I'm there.
Yeah.
I'm always there.
We appreciate that. Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to get out of here. Make sure you check us out on iTunes and all the things. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Periscope, YouTube, Mograph.com, of course. Check it all out. And we're going to get out of here. Make sure you join us on Monday for the holiday episode with David Ariev and EJ Hassenfrost, because we're going to be chilling by the fire, drinking whiskey, and taking phone calls from people. So we're going to get out of here. So until next Monday, I'm Dave.
And I'm Matt.
Yes.
Take care.
Later, yo.
All right.
Hey, can we do before you stop recording? Can we do a quick clap, because my thing stopped recording in the middle of it, and I just so happened to notice.
Sure thing.
So then I started recording again.
Okay, cool. Here we go.
I'll do another clap.
Yeah.
All right. 1, 2, 3. Got bookended claps now. We're good. Thanks everybody for watching online. We're gonna put up this thing. Jules, you can stay on for a second. I'm just gonna finish up the little all my things here. So just give me about 30 seconds here.
Okay. Another minute or so.